Introduction. Passion for diversity and unity is a central characteristic of India culture. It has resulted in an appreciation of divergent viewpoints in the light of some underlying principle of unity. In Hindu philosophy, truth is affirmed to be one and universal, and at the same time endowed with endless forms and modes of expression. Being is affirmed to be non-dual, but at the same time multi-form and multidimensional. The destiny of life is affirmed to be the same, namely, union with the eternal, but it is believed that there are many ways leading to the same destination. It is this non-dualistic outlook which has produced an amazing spirit of toleration and comprehensive understanding in Indian thought. The great religions of the world are accepted as different avenues of approach to the common goal of integration with ultimate reality. The great founders of world religions are accepted as equally divine manifestations in history of the same dynamic world spirit. The different philosophies of the world are viewed as various modes of intellectual formulation of that concrete fullness of existence, which is essentially non-verbal and non-intellectual. Different political ideologies are perceived as relatively valid means of self-development of different countries and nations. Over the centuries, all manner of experiments have been made in India with the spiritual truth, that is to say, in the field of living in harmony with the Supreme Being. The findings of such experiments are embodied in her traditional yoga systems. It is believed that different yoga systems are particularly suitable for different individuals who belong to different psychological types. But in essential design they are all attuned to the same goal, namely, direct union with the ultimate ground of existence. This concept of union with the ground of existence, the concept of yoga, is pivotal to India culture. All religious movements are oriented to it. All philosophical tendencies spring from it. Even social and political ideologies have to reckon with it. The task of social reconstruction and political rebuilding must be in keeping with man's ultimate spiritual destiny, to wit, union with the Supreme Being. Man's direct union with the ultimate ground of existence may briefly be described as existential union. The essence of yoga is existential union. During the Middle Ages, negative and static elements in the concept of existential union were specially emphasized. It was believed by many that in order fully to realize the supreme truth one has sooner or later to renounce the world of social action, samsara. After a person attains spiritual integration, all his springs of action dry up. He waits patiently for the most blessed moment of transcendent peace in the bosom of the eternal, beyond space, time and action. In the meantime he may engage in some deeds of virtue, regardless of consequences. But a striking shift of emphasis in Indian thought was occasioned by the renaissance of Hinduism, which started with Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Sri Ram Krishna, and Swami Dayananda. Affirmative and dynamic elements in the Hindu tradition were reaffirmed and strongly emphasized. In the ancient Vedic period of India, the idea of bringing down the glory of the gods into human life and society was a major spiritual influence. In the Upanishads, the reality of the world was affirmed as a diversified outflow of the fullness of joy in the heart of the Supreme Being Brahman. In the Puranas, the notion of the reign of truth in history, Satya Yuga, was a source of inspiration. The ideal of living true to the kindred points of time and eternity was especially stressed. In the Bhagavad Gita, the concept of the rule of law, the kingdom of truth and righteousness in human society, Dharmarajya, was the central theme of the whole teaching of Sri Krishna. The leading thinkers of modern India have reaffirmed such positive and dynamic conceptions of the spiritual ideal of life. In doing so, they have laid the foundation for a harmonious blending of the highest cultural values of the traditional East and the modern West. They have indicated the lines along which India's spiritual know-how regarding man's union with the ground of existence may be fruitfully combined with the technical and political know-how of the West in improving the conditions of living in the world. Sri Ram Krishna, the saint of Daksine swore, demonstrates the essential unity of all the great religions of the world. He declares that all religions, when followed with the sincerity of purpose and singleness of devotion, ultimately lead to the same goal of God realization or integration with being. But he also points out that the realization of the Supreme Being carries within it the imperative of selfless social service, the service of the divine that dwells in the heart of man. The great poet Rabindranath Tagore stresses the concept of creative freedom. He proclaims that freedom, which is of the essence of the spirit in man, is not freedom from society, but freedom in society. It is in 1001 bonds of loving relationship with fellow beings that true freedom is to be enjoyed. Mahatma Gandhi, the architect of India's national freedom, seizes upon two central concepts of Hindu ethics, truth and non-violence, satya and ahimsa. He believes that these are the common denominator of all historical religions. They represent the soul force, which is vastly superior to the brute force of machine guns and bombs, and therefore capable of solving any political, racial or international problem. They are indispensable in transforming internecine power politics into the politics of human welfare and world peace. The philosopher-statesman Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan stresses the concept of social salvation. The fate of individuals as well as of groups is inextricably linked up with the fate of the entire human family. So no individual can be completely liberated until the human race is liberated. No nation or people can reach its ultimate goal until humanity as a whole is ready for self-fulfillment. Different nations must therefore have an opportunity of growing freely within the framework of international harmony. The silent sage Raman Maharishi emphasizes the need for critical self-inquiry and blissful self-poise. When the self begins to realize its essence, it may at the beginning have a feeling of withdrawal from the world of nature and society. It may at first experience the physical excluded from the trance-like awareness of the spiritual. But when self-awareness is sufficiently deepened, the gulf between the natural and the spiritual is overcome and one can blissfully abide in the self in the midst of all the ordinary activities and pursuits of social existence. Spiritual self-integration becomes then a perfectly natural condition, sahaja. The dynamic seer philosopher Sri Aurobindo stresses the need for the integral experience of being and a creative attitude to life. Integral experience of being involves three factors: I, union with the non-temporal dimension of existence, Shiva; 2, mobilizing the deepest powers and potentialities of the human psyche, Atman, and cooperation or creative fellowship with the evolutionary force of being, Sakti. This concept of integral experience provides a broad basis upon which the insights of the aforesaid leaders of modern India may be unified in an all-embracing synthesis. Gandhi has demonstrated the value of truth and love as guiding principles in the work of the social and political reconstruction of life the world over. Aurobindo believes that this work of reconstruction can be enormously enhanced by mobilizing the hitherto untapped and unsuspected resources of human personality and pressing them into the service of truth, love, and creative evolution. Integral yoga is the art of harmonious and creative living on the basis of the integral experience of being. It aims at opening the springs of creative inspiration hidden in the human psyche. It aims at that serenity of self-poise, which preserves the light of the eternal amidst the storm and stress of social living. It aims at active participation in the being of the world, with a view to the outflowering of the divine in the march of civilization. Integral experience is the basis of an integral worldview, Weltanschauung. Central to the integral viewpoint is the concept of multiform and multidimensional being, Brahman. Being is the ultimate ground of all existence, which different metaphysical systems and religious faiths try to express in different ways. The two inseparable aspects or dimensions of being are the transcendent eternal, Shiva, and the dynamic universal, Sakti. The dynamic universal is the creative energy of being. It is productive of ever new forms, qualities, values, patterns of existence, levels of consciousness, etc. The world process, consisting of nature and history, matter and spirit, is the creative energy of being in manifestation. The human self is an active center of self-expression of being, like a spark of fire issuing forth from the cosmic flame. It is capable of partaking on the one hand of the life eternal of being, and participating on the other in the creative adventure of being. Every human individual is essentially a child of immortality, a focalized expression of the vital urge. His purpose in life is to realize his authentic self as a unique center of creative freedom, as an active source of new values, as a channel of expression of the hidden possibilities of being. Integral yoga is the art of such dynamic self-realization. The present volume purports to present the essentials of integral yoga in a brief outline. It is not intended to be a summary of ideas embodied in any previous work or thought system. The author alone is responsible for the thoughts and interpretations set forth in the following pages. The essentials of integrated living have been developed by him in his own independent way. Metaphysical technicalities have been avoided as far as possible. English equivalents of Sanskrit terms have been mostly preferred with a view to making matters a little easy for the Western reader. Those aspects of Hindu philosophy and Sri Aurobindo's metaphysics which are too abstruse and yet not so necessary from the practical standpoint have been left out of account, for example supernatural planes of existence, subtle distinctions between higher mind, illumined myrid intuitive mind, overmind and supermind, etc. In the first 2 chapters the true meaning of yoga has been elucidated, and the significance of integral yoga has been brought out. Chapters 3 and 4 make a brief critical survey of the traditional yoga systems of India. It is indicated how integral yoga represents a higher creative synthesis of the traditional ideals. In the original teaching of the Vedas and the Upanishads, there was an optimistic affirmation of the world as an outflow of the fullness of joy in the heart of existence. In the monastic orders that grew out of the teaching of the Buddha and Ankara there was a pessimistic emphasis upon world and life negation as a means to the highest spiritual fulfillment. Integral yoga harmonizes in a balanced synthesis the optimistic and pessimistic tendencies, the affirmative and negative attitudes to life. It renounces, not life and world, but man's blind attachment to them. It affirms, not the forces of greed and violence operative in life, but the deeper potentialities of life as a vehicle of truth and beauty and love. On the basis of such affirmation the evolutionary perspective of the modern West can be integrated into the framework of India's spiritual heritage. Chapter 5 sketches the main principles of integral yoga, which is dominated by the ideal of man's integral union with the authentic self, the evolutionary world spirit and the supreme being. Chapter 6 embodies a brief outline of the philosophical basis of integral yoga. It affirms reality to be multiform and multidimensional. The eternal, the dynamic universal and the unique individual are shown to be equally real aspects of the universe. The last 2 chapters are intended to meet the long-felt need for a comprehensive, but succinct account of the most important methods of meditation as practiced in India. It has been indicated how different techniques of spiritual practice can contribute to self-integration and creative freedom. The author owes a debt of gratitude to the mother, Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Pondicherry, for all her gracious help in grasping the essentials of integral yoga. Her kind permission to use in this book some quotations from the basic writings of Sri Aurobindo is thankfully acknowledged. Grateful thanks are also due to Dr. Pidarim A. Sorokin, Director, Harvard Research Center in Creative Altruism, for kindly writing a foreword for this volume. The author. San Francisco, March 1964. Chapter 1. The meaning of yoga. Yoga is a pivotal concept in India culture. It has been at the source of all significant religious and philosophical movements. Philosophic thinking in India has been concerned from the very beginning with the root crisis of the spirit in man. The basic issue of human suffering, including moral, religious and psychological problems, has been traced to one ultimate cause, to wit self-estrangement, alienation from existence, loss of contact with being. Emotional conflicts, social discords, political wars, all these in final analysis, flow from man's loss of contact with the ground of existence, Atman or Brahman. Alienation from existence makes him outwardly oriented to the point of restlessness. He eagerly looks for his happiness in the outside world. He fiercely fights for the blessings of life with rival contestants. He desperately searches for truth as an object of contemplation, as a thing to think about. He seriously endeavors to settle his accounts with fellow beings, by means of objectivized principles, pacts and agreements. He forgets that the crux of his crisis lies within himself, in the buried discrepancies of his own nature. Yoga calls attention to this crucial fact. It aims at that vital existential experience, which reunites man with the inmost center of his own being. No philosopher in India is accounted authentic, unless he is also a yogi. A yogi is one who does not merely talk philosophy but lives philosophy. He does not simply have faith in God but experiences God. For him true philosophy is no mere intellectual pastime. Nor is it just odious contemplation of the real. It must grow out of his existential experience, and help him to intensify and broaden the base of such experience. For a yogi, religion is not a mere system of faith or creed. It is a matter of personal realization or integration with reality. It is a matter of immediate contact with being. Different religions are different pathways leading to this ultimate goal of existential contact. In our present age, the problem of man's alienation from existence has reached fearful proportions. Modern man is in great danger of being crushed by the machines he has himself created. He is in danger of being lost in the crowd. He is faced with the danger of being swallowed by authoritative institutions, giant corporations and monstrous dictatorships. Intensified struggle for existence leaves him little time for coming to terms with his own inner self. Ideological conflicts and international tensions have vastly accentuated his sense of insecurity. Enlightened modern man can hardly fall back upon the mercy of the old gods, i.e. the traditional values of medieval thinking embedded in supernaturalistic dogmas and creeds. The old gods have died, even though the tragic news has not yet reached the orthodox and conservative segments of humanity. Not all those who have heard the news are quite aware of its full significance. The reassuring voice of the new gods is not yet clearly audible. Yoga points to the truth beyond the gods of different races, nations and parochial religions. It affirms the reality of the self, Atman Purusa, as the one beacon light in the enveloping darkness of conflicting creeds and ideologies. Yoga is existential appropriation of the truth. At its best, it is also an act of manifold self-expression of the truth. We call that integral yoga, which we shall discuss at some length in the following chapters. On the basis of balanced union with the ultimate ground of existence, integral yoga aims at the reconstruction of life and society into a growing image of the truth. It stresses the need for creative action in harmony with the cosmic purpose of existence. Unfortunately, a huge amount of misunderstanding has grown around the notion of yoga. A good deal of malpractice has lent support to such misunderstanding. In the minds of many people, yoga is associated with fortune-telling, crystal gazing, glass swallowing, firewalking, etc. Some people associate it with such supernormal powers as levitation, clairvoyance, clairaudience, telepathy, thought reading, etc. Let me relate here a little incident from my own personal experience. It was at San Francisco in May 1951. I was waiting for a public bus at a street corner. An elderly man watched me from a distance and approached with the friendly inquiry, "Are you from India?" On my replying in the affirmative, he promptly asked again, "Are you a yogi?" I paused to think for a while what might be his notion of a yogi, and why he took me for one. I was wondering what I should say to satisfy his inquisitiveness. But he did not wait for my reply. Perhaps he thought that since I was from India I must be a yogi. So he produced his palm before me and said, "Would you care to read my palm, and tell me whether I have any good luck in the near future? The other day I bought a good lottery ticket, you know." That revealed to me at once what his idea of a yogi was. Many people in the West seem to share that idea. For this they are not altogether to blame. There have been many instances of impostors who have wandered around in the guise of yogis and have exploited the credulity and wishful thinking of common people. Those who are a little better informed think of yoga as a system of bizarre physical postures and breathing exercises supposed to be helpful in attaining health, youth and longevity. Some think of it as the means of acquiring various occult powers of extrasensory perception. Some practice it as an aid to salvation or God realization. What is frequently overlooked is that physical postures and breathing exercises do not belong to the essence of yoga. There are systems of yoga, for example those of contemplation, jnana, and devotion, bhakti, which do not include these at all. They occupy a place in hatha yoga and to some extent in raja yoga, but even in these systems they are intended only for some bodily preparation, entitling one to take up higher phases of yogic practice, such as concentration, meditation, and the like. The essence of yoga. What then is the essence of yoga? The word yoga is derived from the Sanskrit root verb yuj, meaning bind, join, unite, control. It is allied to the English word yoke, the German yok, and the Latin jungo, I join. Yoga thus literally means union and control. It signifies the union of man with God, of the individual with the universal reality, of each with the all of existence. It means union of the mortal with the eternal. It implies union of the mind with the inmost center of one's own being, the self or Atman, union of the conscious mind with the deeper levels of the unconscious, resulting in the integration of personality. That is indeed the chief objective of yoga. But yoga also means control, that is to say, appropriate self-discipline. It is the mobilization of the inner resources of personality, with a view to attaining that self-integration which religion calls God realization, and mysticism calls immediate union with the infinite. In this sense, yoga is the method or technique, the program of psychophysical, moral and spiritual training, by following which one can fulfill the ultimate destiny of life. The word yoga thus implies both the goal of life and the path leading to that goal. A yogi is one who follows the spiritual path of self-discipline, or who has attained the goal of self-realization. A basic idea in yoga is that of freedom and spiritual self-expression. Yoga does not believe in any standardized path, for all to follow. It does not stand for any rigidly fixed rule, to which all should conform. It does not offer any patent remedy for human salvation. It affirms the oneness of truth, but rejects the uniformity of living. The fundamental conviction in yoga is that there are different psychological types to which people belong. There are introverts and extroverts, there are contemplatives and activists, there are the self-analytical and impulsive, emotional and intuitive types of people. It is therefore in the fitness of things that corresponding to these different psychological types, there should be different lines of self-development, or different avenues of approach to creative self-expression. The important thing is that every individual should have the opportunity of growing from the roots of his own being, following the bent of his own nature, along the lines indicated by his own psychical makeup, towards the full flowering of his individuality, as a unique creative center of the cosmic whole. Yoga and religion. The question is often asked, is yoga a form of religion? What is the precise relationship between them? It is a grievous mistake to think of yoga as a special form of religion, as distinguished from other religions of the world. Every religion in its essence is regarded by a Hindu as a kind of yoga insofar as it helps man in attaining union with God or integration with existence. Yoga calls upon man to rise above all pet theories and dogmas, and to set aside sectarian creeds and ritualistic observances. They erect barriers between man and create division and dissension in the name of love and unity. Yoga calls attention to the spiritual oneness of all mankind. Persons belonging to different religious faiths may profitably practice yoga without abandoning their particular religious affiliations, and without having to undergo any new kind of religious baptism or creedal conversion. For the practice of yoga, it is not even necessary that a person must have faith in God, let alone any determinate conception of God. Even a skeptic or atheist may with profit practice yoga, provided only that he has a sincere desire to know the truth, and a readiness to live up to his vision of the truth. The basic requirement of yoga practice is the sincerity of purpose and a resolute will to carry on open-minded investigation in the realm of the spirit. If a person starts with some kind of religious faith, yoga aims at turning that faith into personal realization of the truth. Yoga is not a matter of belief, it is that inner growth of consciousness which results in direct insight into the heart of reality. It is not conformity to scriptural injunctions or some fixed socio-cultural pattern, but progressive realization of the full freedom of the inner spirit. It endeavors to turn doubt into critical self-inquiry and faith into living experience. In a sense, yoga is a kind of universal religion. That does not mean a universal system of dogmas and creeds. By the very nature of the case, there can be no universal creed. All creeds are relative to different individuals and different communities. They are relative to the special circumstances of different geographical areas and historical epochs. Yoga is emphatic in its affirmation of the relativity of all creeds. They are relatively valid in helping different individuals and communities in attaining self-fulfillment on a reality basis. Yoga is universal religion insofar as it stresses the oneness of this ultimate goal of all spiritual effort. It lies in satisfactory integration with reality. It may also be described as existential assimilation of the truth. One may also define yoga as a kind of universal spirituality beyond all religions. It is a non-religious spiritual orientation. It believes that when a Hindu achieves the ultimate objective of his spiritual effort, namely integration with truth, he ceases to be a mere Hindu. Born as a Hindu, he becomes a world citizen or cosmic man. When he reaches the goal of Hinduism, he sees that this is also the ultimate goal of other great religions. Hinduism is thus fulfilled in his life beyond itself. Similarly, when a Christian reaches the ultimate goal of his sincere spiritual effort, he ceases to be a mere Christian. Human labels cannot restrict him anymore. He becomes a cosmic man. The same is true of a sincere Buddhist, a sincere Muslim, etc. Different religions are like so many boats helping different peoples to cross the river of ignorance and self-alienation. When the other shore is reached, the boats are left behind. The content of wisdom for which the other shore stands is found to be identical. It is this concept of the identical spiritual destiny of man, this ideal of cosmic integration with the ground of existence, which is the basis of yoga. Yoga and ethics. How does yoga differ from ethics? Does yoga disregard the fundamental ethical distinctions of right and wrong, good and evil? Ethical discipline is believed to be the first indispensable phase of yoga practice. It lays the foundation for higher self-development and deeper self-awareness. Patanjali, the celebrated ancient teacher of yoga, lays stress upon morality as an essential prerequisite to the psychophysical and spiritual training involved in yoga practice. Abstention from evildoing, yama, and observance of noble principles, niyama, are the first two essential steps of his eightfold yogic path. According to his teaching, one should not take up exercises in breathing, concentration and the like, without first developing and strengthening the ethical consciousness through the practice of truthfulness, satya, nonviolence, ahimsa, non-stealing, asteya, non-self-indulgence, brahmacharya, and non-greed, apangraya. But yoga is not the same thing as ethics. Just as it is universal spirituality beyond all creedal religions, so it is self-luminous spirituality beyond all external ethical standards. Yoga looks upon ethics as an essential means to the fulfillment of a higher end, to wit, self-realization or integration with the ground of existence. Such self-realization is regarded as a supramoral mode of existence. From the standpoint of yoga, morality may be said to fulfill itself beyond itself, just as religion fulfills itself beyond itself. Morality is like a boat which helps in crossing the river of ignorance and egoism, and reaching the other shore. The other shore is integration with the ultimate ground of existence. It puts an end to the sufferings of self-estrangement. It is the existential appropriation of truth, love, peace, and freedom. The boat is an essential means of transportation, but having reached the other shore, nobody holds on to it in recognition of its usefulness. The right thing to do is to jump off to the shore, and enjoy the freedom and fulfillment of landing there. In the scheme of self-development called yoga, morality is the foundation and an essential aid to growth. But the crowning achievement is spiritual freedom and spontaneous living, which has been described as beyond good and evil, Dhanvat Uwa. Western scholars have frequently misunderstood this idea of beyond good and evil in Hindu philosophy. So it would not be out of place here to discuss briefly the implications of the concept of supra-ethical self-realization, or of virtue beyond good and evil. First of all, a spiritually liberated person is supra-ethical, not in the sense that he can indulge in immoral actions and injure the interests of society with impunity. By reason of his self-integration, he becomes supra-ethical in the sense he is now by his nature incapable of doing anything harmful to human welfare. He serves society or humanity without any self-righteous feeling or any trace of egocentricity. Even his left hand does not know what his right hand is doing by way of helping others. He performs virtuous actions not out of any inner compulsion, nor out of any sense of moral obligation, nor out of a longing for meritorious action. He performs virtue unconsciously out of the free spontaneity of his integrated nature. He does good to others, not because he has to, but because he takes pleasure in doing so. The practice of virtue is with him the free outpouring of the self, the unmotivated self-giving of the inner spirit, like the shining of the sun or the blossoming of the flower. Secondly, the supramoral implies that man is not made for moral laws, but that moral laws are made for the constructive self-development of man in his individual and social nature. The precise meaning and application of such laws always depend upon the divergent socio-cultural contexts. People cannot be judged without reference to their background and motivation, and the specific combination of circumstances in which they are placed at a given time. A self-integrated person is supramoral in the sense that his actions are not to be judged by ordinary standards of social morality. He has discovered a deeper principle of truth and love in his direct contact with being. He may not often stand on ceremony in dealing with people. He may be unconventional in his mode of living. He may refuse to be impressed with the outward respectability of self-seeking people placed in high positions. He may act as a rebel. Society may condemn him or even crucify him on moral grounds. But still at the higher bar of truth and justice, he may be found vastly superior to those who crucify him. When an ordinary person breaks a social custom or political law of the land, he is morally condemned on the ground that selfish motive obviously dictates his action. But when a man like Gandhi violates a social law, like dining with an outcast, or a political law, like the imperialistic salt law, one has to suspend one's judgment until one knows better. All great spiritual masters like Socrates, Lao Tse, Buddha, Christ, Muhammad, Krishna, etc., have been in a greater or lesser measure supra-moral revolutionaries in their actions, much misunderstood by their contemporaries, but hailed by posterity as architects of man's greater progress and welfare. In the third place, a self-integrated person is beyond good and evil, in the sense that he has transcended all conflicts and tensions within his own nature. So long as a man feels within himself a conflict between passion and reason, flesh and spirit, impulse and law, ego and superego, the ethical consciousness is acute and keen. But as soon as he succeeds in reducing his entire personality to a thoroughly organized and integrated whole, the conflict of good and evil is transcended in a unitary functioning of the total self. He lives and acts freely and spontaneously from the depth of his being. The idea of morality and virtue is in the foreground of consciousness only so long as the allurement or subtle suggestion of sin is there, lurking in the unconscious mind. As soon as this hidden allurement is eliminated through a thorough cleansing of the unconscious, virtue becomes second nature and ceases to be self-conscious. The opposition of impulse and law is transcended in the spontaneity of the spirit. Likewise, the opposition of ego and authority is transcended in the cosmic love of the true self, Atman. Finally, the supra-ethical ideal of yoga implies that the ethical motive is subordinate to the dynamic spiritual perspective. In the initial stages of spiritual unfoldment, the selfless service of society appears like a stern duty, an unconditional imperative. Love of the neighbor, love of humanity, is a divine commandment. But on the attainment of self-integration, one freely serves society as a matter of joyful self-expression. One then actively and spontaneously loves humanity, as the diversified expression of the one cosmic self, Parama Atman, with which one is identified. Ethical action is then revealed no longer as an abstract duty, nor as an unpleasant self-sacrifice. It is revealed as productive self-fulfillment in society. It is experienced as joyful self-expression, and self-relating to the universe. The ethical motive is thus transformed into unfettered creative expression of the illumined consciousness. Through such transformation, the ethical motive gains a new depth and a higher creative dynamism. We are now in a position to observe that yoga is not ethics, it includes ethics and yet transcends it. Yoga does not believe in the absolute and unconditional validity of any ethical formulation. It does not believe in rigid conformity to any unalterably fixed ethical code. On the other hand, yoga does not also deny the immense value and importance of ethical discipline for constructive self-development and social progress. For yoga, law is the body and freedom is the soul. Balanced self-discipline is the means and self-integration is the goal. There is no freedom without law, but law may easily defeat its purpose by swallowing the spirit of freedom. There is no achievement without discipline, but discipline may easily become rigid in one side, and thus defeat its purpose by mutilating personality. There is no growth without conformity to some regulating principle. But conformity to principle sometimes becomes a neurotic obsession, hindering further progress. In promoting spiritual growth, morality fulfills itself beyond itself. And it is the concept of free spiritual growth, which is the main concern of yoga. Yoga and philosophy. How is yoga related to philosophy? Is it based upon any particular philosophical system? Or does it completely repudiate the value of all philosophizing? Just as ethics is an essential factor in the practice of yoga, so also philosophy plays an important part in the scheme of self-development called yoga. Philosophy is an organized set of ideas regarding the meaning of life and the position of the individual in the total scheme of existence. There are different systems of philosophy, just as there are different systems of yoga, corresponding to different psychological types of people. Some kind of philosophical worldview, Weltanschauung, is essential for the release of the creative energies of the human soul. Yoga makes full use of this ideological apparatus for the constructive growth of personality, instead of pronouncing wholesale condemnation upon systematic philosophizing. But yoga does not believe that every individual must adopt the same kind of philosophical worldview. It is quite in the fitness of things that people belonging to different psychological types would need different kinds of philosophical formulation for their spiritual nourishment, intellectual growth and meaningful self-expression. It is not a final and complete philosophy of life, which is the goal of yogic practice. An unalterably fixed philosophical system is neither possible nor desirable nor necessary. It is not possible, because reality is essentially non-verbal and non-conceptual. The concrete fullness of reality can hardly be equated with any conceptual scheme of verbal symbols that philosophy is. In consideration of this fact, attachment to an absolute philosophical system would be undesirable. It would produce dogmatism and detract attention from the need for existential experience. An absolute system is not also necessary in any way. What is vitally needed for human growth is relative truth, not absolute truth. The function of philosophy lies in providing useful intellectual tools for the growth of human personality, eventually resulting in the immediate experience of reality. So in order to be useful and valuable for different psychological types, it is only natural that there should be different relatively valid philosophical systems emphasizing and crystallizing such aspects of reality as would be stimulating, nourishing and inspiring to different individuals and groups. Yoga then is not philosophy, it includes philosophy and yet transcends it. In the scheme of constructive self-development called yoga, a definite philosophical system appropriate to a particular individual plays a very significant and useful role. But as soon as the ultimate goal of yoga is attained, the individual goes beyond the furthest limits of that philosophical formulation, which had been his sustaining creed for so long. Thus philosophy fulfills itself beyond itself. The seeker after truth now attains immediate contact with being. The content of such immediate experience is, by its very nature, incapable of being adequately expressed within the four corners of a determinate philosophical system or rigid thought structure. Its expression in intellectual terms is bound to be conditioned by the prevailing intellectual climate and by the purpose and plan of action of the yogi in a given historical situation. But the inadequacy and relativity of philosophical worldviews is no argument against their usefulness and validity. Philosophical articulation of the immediacy of yogic experience is of paramount importance in various ways. It is an effective means of communication with fellow beings. It assists in sharing with them the treasures of spiritual insight. Secondly, philosophy is immensely helpful in comparing, correlating and arranging in a comprehensive picture the different levels of spiritual intuition and mystical experience. Thirdly, it can play a very constructive role in correlating and coordinating the facts of spiritual intuition with such other areas of human experience as aesthetic creation, moral action, scientific investigation, social organization, etc. Thus, whereas yoga transcends philosophy in its advance towards supra-intellectual experience of pure existence, philosophy transcends yoga by bringing that experience into the sphere of rational communication and of the total organization of life and society. In anticipation of our discussion in the following chapter, a word may be added here about the concept of integral yoga. Traditional yoga looks upon ethics and philosophy as valuable aids to mystic realization and spiritual freedom. Therein lies its major emphasis. For integral yoga, ethics, philosophy and mysticism, action, knowledge and freedom, are inseparable moments in the total spiritual fulfillment of man. We have seen that on the attainment of mystic union with existence, ethics undergoes a radical change. The liberated person acts, no longer in conformity with any external standard, but freely out of the fullness of his love of man and God. He acts no longer out of any sense of obligation or inner compulsion, but on the basis of his luminous vision of the dynamic significance of society and civilization. Likewise, on the attainment of genuine spiritual freedom, philosophy loses its absolutism. No particular thought system such as materialism, idealism, realism, humanism, transcendentalism, etc., is equated anymore with the absolute truth. The liberated man considers different philosophical systems as different perspectives of the same multidimensional reality. Each is important in its own way, but none can be said to utter the last word of wisdom. But this should be no justification for a life of floating indecision and inaction either. For an integral yogi, philosophic contemplation loses its power, as the siren's song of distraction from the main business of living. In a given historical situation, he chooses or develops a determinate thought system as the basis for action towards the fulfillment of his life mission in society. He has no dogmatic or finalistic illusion about his philosophical position. He perceives its value and usefulness in his service of man and pursuit of higher values. Thus an integral yogi is at once a mystic and a philosopher. He is at once a contemplative and an activist. Integral yoga reconciles the antagonistic principles of comprehensive thinking and existential choice, the principles of detached contemplation and loving participation in life. Yoga and psychology. How is yoga related to psychology? Psychology is a positive and empirical science of the mind insofar as the mind is knowable by methods of observation, experiment, and analysis. Yoga is the science of human personality in respect of its inner growth and creative self-fulfillment. It may be regarded both as a science and an art insofar as it includes in its approach both theoretical and practical motivations. As a science, it is knowledge of the self in its totality. As an art, it is the way of achieving the free growth and total fulfillment of the self. The self is understood in yoga as a multidimensional reality. It is not just the conscious rational mind, or the totality of conscious and unconscious mental phenomena, or the mind-body complex. It includes in its structure what Dr. Al-Peidró Sorokin has called a supraconscious component. This supraconscious component of human personality is logically indefinable, and certainly inaccessible to external observation and analysis. It is, however, capable of being immediately experienced, and intimately known by methods of organized and harmonious living. Yoga stresses the need for such methods of living, so that one can acquire thereby increasing insight into the nature and dynamics of the superconscious. The methodology of yoga includes not only the methods of introspection and detached seiyuu observation, but also the techniques of dynamic self-transcendence, psychophysical self-energizing, critical self-inquiry, altruistic love, selfless action, watchful relaxation, etc., which fall outside of the scope of psychology as an empirical study. These techniques will be briefly discussed in the last 2 chapters. Yoga appears to be more metaphysical than psychological on account of its use of such concepts as the superconscious, the pure self, Purusa or Atman, timeless experience, samadhi, nirvana, etc., and the like. Are not these concepts trans-empirical? Some fundamental yogic concepts are no doubt trans-empirical insofar as they go beyond external perception, sensuous observation, and ordinary introspection. But they are not trans-experiential. They are descriptive of the facts of self-awareness on deeper levels of personality. They stand for profound psychological experiences, which are believed to be accessible to all qualified and trained seekers. It is therefore a grievous mistake to construe yogic concepts as imaginative hypotheses of metaphysical speculation or postulates of religious faith. They are empirical in the broader sense of the term, because they are verifiable in the context of direct personal experience, by anybody who cares to verify them, by following appropriate methods of investigation. Yoga is the science of human personality and its integral unity. The human mind is not just a given fact or thing out there to be analyzed into factual propositions. Nor is it, on the other hand, a mere idea or disembodied spirit fashioning utopian ideals and delivering unconditional imperatives. Neither naturalism nor rationalistic ethics can furnish us with the key to the structure of human personality. The human mind is a dynamic growth with its hidden aspirations and unsuspected potentialities, with its creative freedom and unseen sources of inspiration. So according to yoga, true knowledge of the human spirit cannot be obtained by mere application of the so-called scientific methods. Such knowledge can be gained only in the course of integrated living and the inner growth of consciousness. It is inseparable from an existing individual's total response to life. Knowing here is inseparable from being, and being is inseparable from becoming. Dr. Indra Sen has rightly observed, Indian psychology is not a natural science concerned with the is of mental life. It is also not a normative science concerned with the ought, the ideal alone. It is, we might say, a science of the becoming of conscious life, that of growth from the actual to the possible. Whereas modern Western psychology is an empirical study of the psyche in its conscious and unconscious aspects, yoga is active participation in the creative growth and self-fulfillment of the psyche. Wisdom which grows out of such participation throws a new light upon many psychological problems. The self-exploration of yoga goes far beyond empirical psychology by disclosing such depths and heights of the psyche as are inaccessible to the methods of introspection, external observation and objective psychoanalysis. Yoga is the art of self-knowing through concentrated living, and that of abundant living through increasing self-awareness. Yoga and mysticism. Mysticism is one of the most slippery words in the English language. At its worst it means mystery-mongering, occultism, obscurantism, and the like. At its best it means immediate union with the ultimate ground of existence. We may consider here mysticism in its higher form and compare it with yoga. Mystics in the best sense of the term are those who attain direct personal realization of the fundamental truth of existence, whether that truth be called God, self, void, nothingness, being, silence, or the supreme mystery. But mysticism does not involve any definite methodically chalked out path by following which mystic realization may be achieved. Mystics often stumble into their strange and unusual experiences. Mysticism does not provide any technique for systematic organization of such unusual experiences or for their proper coordination with the ordinary non-mystic areas of human consciousness, sensuous, intellectual, moral, aesthetic and emotional. Yoga implies faith in definite and systematic procedures by following which mystic experience of pure existence can be achieved. It shows a scientific spirit of investigation in the domain of the spirit or in the realm of the unconscious. It also believes in the need for a rational understanding of the interrelations that exist between mystic realization and other provinces of human experience. Oftener than not, mysticism sets itself in opposition to logic and philosophy. Intellect is condemned as a hindrance to mystical intuition. But yoga stands for that total self-integration in which the intellectual aspect of personality has to be satisfied no less than the emotional and volitional aspects. So it looks upon logic and philosophy as valuable aids to self-fulfillment. They are conducive to the clarification of ideas and the broadening of outlook. Yogic realization is not the negation but consummation of the intellectual quest for the existential truth. Intellect is fulfilled beyond itself in the ontological insight of the yogi. Yoga in its integral form maintains that when mystical insight is carried sufficiently deep, it becomes a great creative factor in human living. According to integral yoga, the harmony of wisdom, love and action is the substance of complete mystic realization. It is skill and works in the sense that it is the art of acting on the basis of a dynamic self-poise being, Brahmastiti. Through union with being, the integral yogi is united with the all of existence, with the world process. So he acts in the world in the spirit of cosmic love and comprehensive vision of truth. He participates in life on the basis of a balanced ontological outlook. Traditional yoga has distinguished the mysticism of knowledge, love, meditation, action, etc. The ultimate goal of all of them is mystic union with being. But such mystic union may be static or dynamic, partial or complete. When it fastens exclusively upon the timeless aspect of being, it amounts to static realization. It encourages preoccupation with the eternal, somewhat to the neglect of the cosmic significance of time. But complete mystic union, which is the aim of integral yoga, involves an awareness of the cosmic meaning of time, as well as a grasp of the eternal. It involves an understanding of the total structure of being, which includes the power of cosmic creativity, God, as well as the freedom of pure transcendence, nothingness. Mystic awareness of transcendence and eternity bestows ineffable peace and freedom. Mystic awareness of the creative significance of time inspires active participation in life. The integral yogi participates in the evolutionary advance of time on the basis of a transcendent self-poise in the eternal. The integral yogi thus brings mysticism down to earth. He hears the voice of heaven in the evolving earth consciousness of man. He feels the heartbeat of man in his striving for the kingdom of heaven on earth. But is not this whole idea of man's mystic union with the infinite philosophically untenable? Is not there an unbridgeable gulf between the finite and the infinite, between existence and transcendence? The aforesaid problem is posed by the dualistic thinking of discursive reason. Yoga as higher mysticism is based upon a non-dualistic outlook. Such dualisms as finite and infinite, existence and transcendence, are, in ultimate analysis, distinctions developed within the comprehensive unity of being. They are relatively valid insofar as they designate different interrelated aspects of being. But they do not represent irreconcilably separate segments of reality. Nor are they any argument against the interpenetrative continuum of the real. From the non-dualistic standpoint of Indian thought, the infinite is not the opposite of the finite, but its inmost center and basis. The finite is a mode of manifestation of the infinite. So the finite can grasp the infinite by being one with itself. It does not, to be sure, know the infinite as an object, because the object falls outside of the subject. It knows the infinite by being aware of that ground of existence in which subject and object are united. Mystic union is not an external relationship. It is that non-relational experience in which both subject and object are transcended and unified. Man can directly contact pure transcendence, because the transcendent is also immanent in him as the unifying center of his existence. He contacts transcendence through deeper self-awareness. The transcendent is no doubt beyond nature and man, matter and spirit. But at the same time it is that ultimate unity in which they are unified. Nature and man are modes of manifestation of the same creative power of transcendence. So the transcendent is dynamically present in nature as the universal life force. It also dwells in the heart of man as his inmost self. Does man's mystic union with transcendence amount to the liquidation of his individuality? Is the mystic swallowed up in the fathomless depth of being? Many Western and Christian thinkers are terribly afraid of this prospect of self-loss and mystic union. The dualistic logic of either the individual or the transcendent, has lent support to this fear. The influence of this dualistic logic inherited from Aristotle has been so dominant in the Western mind, that it has not always fully grasped the significance of the teaching of Christ, that it is by losing oneself that one can gain life everlasting. Resurrection of the spirit follows upon the crucifixion of the ego. Resurrection of the eternal and universal follows upon the crucifixion of the temporal particular. When a man loses himself completely in being, he is reborn in the depth of being with all the glory of a divine child. What is annihilated is his egocentric individuality. But out of the ruins of the ego is born his true self. He is reborn as a cosmic man. He vividly realizes the oneness of all existence. He is also reborn as a uniquely creative personality. United with the center of being, he glimpses the deeper significance of becoming. He joins forces with the creative flow of becoming. He becomes aware of the power of individuality as a source of new values, and as a significant determinant of the world process. He freely cooperates with the cosmic creativity of being. Let us now turn to a brief discussion of the concept of the immediate in yogic mysticism. The idea of immediate union with being has been misunderstood in various ways by Western scholars. Some think that the immediate experience of yoga is a regression to the primitive man's affective union with nature. They call it the oceanic feeling. It is the immediate feeling of kinship with the natural world of rivers and mountains, trees and animals. It is the original mode of existence of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. It is the undifferentiated aesthetic continuum of sensuous immediacy. It is the child's presentation continuum, the big booming buzzing confusion. But the above is a complete misunderstanding of that supersensuous identity consciousness, samadhi, nirvana, etc., which is the goal of yoga discipline. Yoga discovers a principle of unity beyond both sensuous immediacy and rational mediation. The primitive man's union with nature was sensuous, affective or emotional union. He was submerged in the undifferentiated aesthetic continuum of the natural. So he had to break his emotional ties with nature, in order to discover himself as a spiritual entity as man. The loss of paradise by Adam and Eve was therefore a big step forward towards spiritual self-development. Growth of the intellectual power of self-consciousness, and the ethical distinction of good and evil, brought about this loss of contact with nature. This was indispensable for the realization of the distinctive powers of man as man, and for his mastery over nature. In the course of further spiritual development, man had similarly to break other emotional ties. For instance, he had to break the bonds of attachment to the father image and the mother image in his search for the self. He had to break loose from the fetters of tradition and authority in his undaunted spiritual adventure. It is erroneous to think that yoga recommends the act of retracing these steps of civilization and going back to the original condition of the primitive man's sensuous and affective union with nature. On the contrary, Yoga stresses the need for gradual transcendence of all emotional ties to home and soil and kith and kin, with a view to fully realizing the self. That is why the notions of non-attachment, anasakshi, and renunciation, sannyasa, play a dominant role in the practice of yoga. But yoga believes that when a person discovers his inmost self, Atman, a deeper principle of unity in the heart of existence is disclosed to him. It is that transcendent unity of being, Brahman or Purusa, of which sensuous immediacy and rational mediation are different modes of manifestation in the process of evolution. The undifferentiated aesthetic continuum and the differentiated structure of logical thinking are different phases of the creative self-expression of being. Yogic immediacy is not a retrograde movement to the pre-logical and pre-ethical mode of infantile sensuous emotional experience. On the contrary, it is an advance through self-integration to a kind of supralogical insight into the comprehensive unity of being. It involves an act of self-transcendence beyond subject-object polarization. It aims at that supra-relational immediacy of which modern Western philosophers like F. H. Bradley and Bernard Bosanquet had some inkling. Some have argued that mystic union with being is nothing but wish fulfillment of the undying child in man. The growing individual always retains an unconscious nostalgic longing for the paradise of childhood union with the father or mother. There may even be a hidden longing for re-entry into the absolute peace and protection of the mother's womb. Is mysticism a sort of sublimated fulfillment of that longing? If so, is it not void of any ontological significance? Let us assume for argument's sake that mysticism is sublimated fulfillment of an unconscious longing for the lost paradise of childhood. But does that necessarily knock out the ontological significance of the resulting experience of reunion with existence? The most remarkable thing about life is that one thing here always leads to another. A miraculous process of transformation is continuously going on in the creativity of nature. Coal turns into diamond, mud turns into rose, soil into rich crops. Hydrogen and oxygen mixed in definite proportions produce water. But it is sheer stupidity to suggest that water is nothing but hydrogen and oxygen. What emerges out of them is an entirely new category, an emergent value. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen and nitrogen, combined in a specific configuration give rise to the living protoplasm. But it is sheer stupidity to suggest that life is nothing but physical and chemical forces. The living protoplasm is in truth a qualitative novelty, a unique emergent value. It represents a new dimension of reality radically different from physical and chemical forces. A man who has been bitterly disappointed in his love affairs turns heart and soul to the mistress of art or science. He obtains sublimated fulfillment of the frustrated erotic impulse in his exalted experience of truth or beauty. It is sheer ignorance to suggest that truth and beauty, as revealed to the scientist and the artist, are devoid of any ontological significance. They are in fact higher emergent values in human experience. They represent entirely new dimensions of reality. Similarly, a man's nostalgic longing for the lost paradise may kindle a new fire in his soul. It may stimulate and awaken deeper powers of his consciousness. It may inspire in him a sustained effort to be reintegrated with existence on a higher plane of consciousness. He carries on this effort through a reorganization of his whole being in accordance with a central purpose. The resulting experience of mystic union with being represents a new emergent value. It affords a deep insight into the timeless dimension of existence. At the touch of the eternal, the human individual blossoms to the full just as a flower breaks into bloom at the touch of sunlight. When Christ says, "T and my Father in heaven are one," he voices a profound yogic experience. In this experience the child in the human unconscious certainly obtains a new fulfillment. But it is fulfilled on a higher level of personality development. It is fulfilled through the discovery of a deeper principle of unity in life, and a higher creative power. When a Vedantin says "T am essentially one with being Brahman," he gives voice to his experience of existential contact with the eternal. He experiences the rootedness of his existence in the comprehensive unity of being. His experience is neither sensuous nor intellectual nor emotional. It is the tikidal experience of his total self in response to the total universe. It is the ontological awareness of his integrated personality. Likewise, when a Rajayogi says, "I am one with the inmost center of my being Purusa," he expresses his discovery of the ultimate unifying principle of youth, the self or the spirit in man. In making this discovery, the individual is reborn on a higher plane of existence. Not only the child in him, his nostalgic longing for reunion with being, is satisfied here. He now experiences reality and its deeper unity by the power of his integrated personality. He is reborn as a new child, as a divine child, as an offspring of the integration of such divergent aspects of his nature, as the intellectual and the emotional, the discursive and the intuitive. He recaptures the freshness and spontaneity of childhood through a contact with the deathless fire of life. 1. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali 2:30 and 32. 1. Dr. Pitarim A. Sorokin, ed. Forms and Techniques of Altruistic and Spiritual Growth, Boston, The Beacon Press, 1954 pp 5-6. 1. Vaidhi Drive Indra Sen's article The Indian Approach to Psychology and the Integral Philosophy of Sri Aurobindo, Chaudhary and Spiegelberg, eds. London, George Allen and Unwin Limited, 1960 p. 187. 1. Sri Aurobindo, Essays on the Gita, New York, E. P. Dutton and Company, 1953 p. 93. 1. F. S. C. Northrop. The Meeting of East and West, New York, The Macmillan Company, 1950 p. 368. Chapter 2. The AIM of Integral Yoga. Says in the Bhagavad Gita that a true yogi is a person who is dynamically united with the divine in the field of action. The yogi is superior to the ascetic, the contemplative and the ritualist. 1. Yoga is essentially an act of dedication to the cosmic purpose of existence, the spiritual destiny of life. It is this dynamic conception of yoga, which has been carried to its full logical development in Integral Yoga, Purna Yoga. When a man's union or existential contact with being becomes integral, i.e. balanced and complete, he is transformed into a dynamic personality. Integral vision of the truth turns him into a creator of new values. It inspires him to participate in life with a new sense of urgency and a new grasp of meaning. The distinctive goal of Integral Yoga will be briefly outlined in this chapter in the background of the traditional yoga systems of India. Integral Yoga may be defined as the art of harmonious and creative living. It stresses the need for the balanced growth of personality, for constructive development of the latent possibilities of one's nature, and for their employment in the service of mankind, and such higher values as truth, justice, freedom, peace and progress. Integral Yoga warns against extreme tendencies which mislead people into lopsided development. There are some who develop muscles at the cost of brains. There are some who over-exercise their brains much to the neglect of the body. Some again practice deliberate self-mortification, and disparage both the physical and the intellectual in their search for the soul. There are some who are so much bent upon self-development, that they ignore the social and humanistic values of life. On the other hand, there are some who are so much entangled in social activities, that suppressed emotional conflicts undermine their personal peace, as well as social efficiency. There are some who follow the voice of God by rejecting the world. On the other hand, there are some who get enmeshed in the affairs of the world, without any idea of the eternal in man. Integral Yoga sets forth the concept of the full flowering of the total individual as a dynamic center of the universal spirit, the power of being. It emphasizes the need for a balanced integration of the physical, emotional, intellectual, ethical, and religious aspects of personality. Life and Yoga. The whole course of our life is a striving for the realization of higher values. Values represent the riches of being, its dynamic potentialities. Life springs from the depths of being and presses forward towards the fulfillment of the various possibilities of being. Thus, whether we are aware of it or not, the whole movement of life is in a sense a process of yoga. It flows in union with the creative purpose of being. It evolves in the direction of deepening awareness of that purpose. The more a person advances in life, the deeper is his insight into the cosmic purpose of being and its hidden possibilities. The practice of yoga in the strict sense of the term is a resolute will to allow the power of being to work more and more freely within us. It is a commitment to higher spiritual values. Ordinary life is a slow and meandering movement unconsciously determined by the cosmic power. Yoga is intelligent cooperation with that power in full measure. It is an acceleration of the tempo of life's process occasioned by a sort of Copernican revolution in the field of consciousness, i.e. by a transition from the egocentric to the cosmocentric outlook. Now, there are different levels of cosmic awareness. There are different modes of apprehension of the cosmic whole. It has been rightly observed, being is one although sages call it by different names. But the unity of being is not a blank featureless unity. It is a manifold and multicolored unity. It has an infinite richness of content, and an endless diversity of forms, aspects and modes of manifestation. Different truth seekers have approached it from different directions, differently motivated, differently equipped. Some have beheld it as the personal God, and some have perceived it as the impersonal truth. Some have known it as the spirit of nature, and some have glimpsed it as the reality of supernature. Some have regarded it as the total fact, and some have envisaged it as the supreme value. Some have defined it by the concept of equality, whereas some have conceived it in terms of the ideal of freedom. According to integral yoga, all the aforesaid views represent different perspectives of the same being. Each perspective brings to light a certain facet of being. And each perspective has some value and importance for some people in certain circumstances. But no perspective can be said to exhaust the concrete fullness of being. No thought system or scheme of values can possibly express the whole and final truth. It is like the same elephant appearing as a pillar to some blind person, as a wall to some, as a serpent to some, as a fan to some. These limited tactual perceptions are unified in the total vision of the elephant. But no blind man has that total vision. Likewise, no human ideology or value system can encompass the multiform fullness of being. The history of Indian culture is full of endless experiments with the truth in the sphere of living. All conceivable paths have been explored for unveiling the nature and purpose of being. Hatha Yoga, Raja Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Vedantism, Vaishnavism, Tantricism including Eovism and Iktism, the Hinayana and Mahayana schools of Buddhism, are some of the most noteworthy of such spiritual experiments. Yoga is the general name for these experiments. It is the art of living in harmony with the fundamental truth of existence. Understood in this sense, genuine mystics in other parts of the world can also be called yogis. Neoplatonists, Taoists, Jewish and Christian mystics, Sufis, Zen Buddhists, etc., can be said to have followed the path of yoga with marvelous results. Following the principle of cosmic integration, they have been able to gain deep insights into the heart of existence. It is of vital importance today that the ontological insights embodied in the highest spiritual experiences of mankind should be given a practical and dynamic form. Dedicated souls the world over should discover a common meeting ground and a way of sincerely cooperating towards the fulfillment of the common destiny of man. They have to mobilize the spiritual resources of man in solving his most crucial problems, to wit, the problems of human unity, peace and progress. Integral yoga is concerned with such human cooperation and spiritual mobilization. It is an appeal to the religious impulse of man for active participation in the evolutionary advance of life, on the basis of balanced self-integration. Inadequacy of the ascetic ideal. Like the religious approach of the West in the Middle Ages, the yoga systems of India during the medieval period were largely inspired by the ascetic ideal of transcendent liberation. They were largely life-renouncing and world-negating. All the evils and sufferings of life were traced to our subjection to the cosmic creative principle. Some defined this cosmic principle as unconscious nature. Some defined it as the cosmic principle of ignorance or nescience. Some conceived it as the unconscious will or ignorant desire. But they were all agreed on one point, namely, that our existence is a condition of entanglement in the wheels of the cosmic drive. It is blind identification with the vital impetus. All suffering flows from this identification. The way to eternal bliss would therefore consist in an act of disentanglement from the cosmic drive. Renunciation of all social bonds is the one great exit from the deceptive merry-go-round of life. The goal of spiritual effort has been conceived in Patanjali's yoga as transcendental loneliness, kaivalya. It is the condition of self abiding in separation from the world of action and reaction, claim and counterclaim, pain and pleasure, sustained by nature, prakrit. The Vedantin has conceived the ultimate goal as absorption in the eternal, Braham Laya. It is the awareness of the one eternal spirit as the only reality, the world of many individuals being an illusory superimposition thereupon. The Buddhist has conceived it as an indescribable spiritual condition beyond both existence and non-existence. It is the awareness of the evanescence of life and the emptiness of the eternal. Thus we see that the most dominant spiritual ideals of medieval India deprecated the value of life and the cosmic flow. They considered ignorance, avidya, as the root cause of social, economical and political action. They overemphasized the notions of renunciation and ascetic negation. They glorified eternity by denouncing the march of time as the movement of ignorance. But that was in striking contrast with the affirmative and optimistic outlook of the Vedic, Upanishadic and Puranic sages of India. The Upanishads declared that the world came into existence out of the fullness of joy in the heart of being. Life in the world is therefore not a movement of ignorance, but an adventure in the diversified expression of creative joy. The Puranas proclaimed that the highest goal of life was to act in this world, true to the kindred points of time and eternity. The timeless perspective, which is the essence of spiritual wisdom, makes a man free, curing him of egotism and aggressiveness. But it also lays the groundwork for perfect action. He is now in a position to participate in life, as a perfect instrument of the values of eternity. This is the advice which the great Hindu sage Brihaspati gave to the Lord Indra as related in Brahmavaivarta Purana. Integral yoga reaffirms the original Hindu ideal of participating in life, as an instrument of the eternal. It holds that mere emancipation from the bonds of the cosmic drive, prakriti or maya, is an incomplete spiritual ideal. Such emancipation has to be given a positive content. It is the beginning of a new life of action. It lays the foundation for enlightened participation in the creative joy of the world's spirit, or the divine in history. According to integral yoga, it is not enough to attain self-realization. There is a much nobler goal of human effort, and that is to achieve self-manifestation, that is, to apply in the sphere of daily living and social action, the light and power of deeper self-awareness. It is not enough to gain liberation from unconscious nature. There is a much sublimer goal of human endeavor, and that is to liberate nature herself in the growing fulfillment of the creative urge concealed in her breast. Those who are enamored of the medieval ideal of liberation follow the path of negation. They follow the via negativa of the mystics or the neti-neti, not this of the traditional yogis. They choose to rise higher and higher, until the highest point is reached from which there is no coming back. Integral yoga stresses the need for supplementing ascent by descent, negation by deeper and fuller affirmation. One has surely first of all to climb the path of ascent and rise to the height of inward illumination. But if one is to participate in the creative joy of being, one has to know how to correlate the upward movement of human aspiration with the downward movement of the timeless spirit. Having reached the height of his vision of the eternal, the integral yogi strives to express in the flux of time the glories of eternity. Having glimpsed the creative light of being on a higher plane of consciousness, he descends into the physical and social spheres with a view to reconstructing human existence in accordance with that light. Ascent and descent are then two inseparable aspects of the movement of integral yoga. They are the systole and diastole of integral self-discipline. Our yoga, says Sri Aurobindo, is a double movement of ascent and descent. One rises to higher and higher levels of consciousness, but at the same time one brings down their power not only into mind and life, but in the end even into the body. And the highest of these levels, the one at which it aims, is the supermind. Only when that can be brought down is the divine transformation possible in the earth consciousness. Transformation of existence. The followers of the exclusive path of ascent look upon body, life and mind, as forming a sort of ladder which has to be used for climbing up to the summit of spiritual enlightenment. But after the summit is reached, the ladder may be kicked aside. It is no use holding on to the ladder or climbing down it, except temporarily for showing other people the way to use it properly. But for integral yoga, body, life and mind are not simply means of rising up to the highest peak, but also means of bringing down below and expressing here and now the glory of the spirit. They are not to be treated as a mere ladder, but must be prepared as channels of expression of higher values in the world. In order that they may function effectively in that capacity, integral yoga insists that the dynamic truth consciousness should be made operative in all of them. All the parts of our existence, including even the physical and the darkest subconscious, must be open to the transmutive power of the light of being. Herein lies the unique characteristic which distinguishes integral yoga from the traditional systems of religious discipline. Traditional mystics, yogis and religious seekers looked upon the body as a burden upon the soul. Plato regarded the body as a prison house for the free and immortal soul. Some mystics considered the body as an incorrigible abode of evil and sin, of passion and temptation. Ascetics looked upon the body as a necessary evil, which must be discarded on the attainment of spiritual liberation. This pessimistic attitude of traditional spirituality encouraged the widespread practice of bodily torture, austerity and self-mortification as a means of spiritual advancement. It released the masochistic and escapist tendencies latent in human nature. Integral yoga looks upon the body as an immensely valuable means of self-fulfillment and self-expression. The so-called passions and impulses of the flesh are the source of elemental energy. The vital impulses should not be suppressed or eliminated, but intelligently organized and lawfully satisfied. Through such organization and satisfaction, they have to be constructively channeled towards the realization of the higher ends of life. To torture or mutilate the body in the name of religious growth is an infantile procedure. The body has to be adequately developed and strengthened, not of course just for its own sake, but for the sake of the spirit. It has to be carefully built up as a powerful and effective means of serving the higher values of existence. Even after the full realization of the divine, the body has to be used as an instrument for expressing the divine will in society. To that end, it can be more and more purified, strengthened and transformed by the higher powers of consciousness. Dynamic union with being. The second distinctive feature of integral yoga lies in the concept of dynamic union with being. It is conscious and active integration with the ultimate ground of existence. Traditional mysticism has always emphasized the notion of direct union with the eternal. Hinduism has called it samadhi. Buddhism has called it nirvana. Christian mystics have called it unitive consciousness, cosmic consciousness, etc. This unitive consciousness has frequently been conceived as a kind of supraphysical exalted state of consciousness. The mystic loses here his contact with the outside world, and he finds here a revelation of the unreality of the material world or the natural order. But integral yoga maintains that such an exalted matter-negating type of mystic vision is only a passing phase of the spiritual quest, and certainly not the goal. After the content of such transcendental realization is thoroughly assimilated, the barrier between the physical and the spiritual is removed. The mystic then acquires what may be called waking union with the divine. He brings down the wisdom and joy of transcendence right into the heart of his physical consciousness. He maintains the inner peace and blissful self-poise, even while engaged in the ordinary activities of life, such as eating, walking, talking with people, etc. The serenity of samadhi becomes his second nature. The barrier between the natural and the supernatural breaks down. Through integral union with being, the natural material is revealed to him as a diversified expression of the creativity of being. Moreover, mystic union in integral form becomes dynamic. It changes the mystic into a creative personality. He cannot rest content with his own inner peace and joy anymore. He participates in the creative adventure of life and evolution, with a view to realizing higher values. Inwardly he is integrated with the ground of existence, outwardly he is engaged in all manner of activities for the good of humanity, and in the best interests of human progress. He can maintain the perfect serenity of self-poise, even while occupied with fighting with such forces of evil as despotism, tyranny, social injustice, racial prejudice, etc. Such dynamic union with the ground of existence is an essential factor in complete self-realization. It is the power of functioning wholeheartedly in life, as an instrument of truth and justice. It is the free and spontaneous outflow of the inward realization of the cosmic purpose of existence. Collective liberation of mankind.